All right. So, welcome back to the Gamble Data Engineering channel. I'm Chris Gamble. Thank you for joining this evening. I've been in data engineering positions for the last 25 years. I've done everything from being an individual contributor to being a director of data and analytics for a cybersecurity org within a large telecommunications company at AT&T. And uh, I love data engineering. And so I am here to share my knowledge with you so that you all can become master data engineers as well. So hopefully, for those of you that have been around, uh, you're getting something out of the content and learning and growing and continuing on your data engineering journey. And I hope that it's exciting for you as it is for me. I honestly love it. It is really my passion in life. Hey, welcome back. Um, so tonight, I'll be fielding questions just like I do on Friday nights. I do these generally on Friday evenings around 10 o'clock for an hour ish. Sometimes they run a couple hours. So happy to answer any questions. And just tonight, going to talk through things like the core skills that you need as a data engineer, the kind of the data engineering um, trends that are going on now with generative AI and some other things that are going on, and then talking about how you can grow your career once you get into a data profession, have a data title, how you can really grow your career into from being a junior level data professional into being a senior and beyond. So, going to talk through some of that and what that takes and what that looks like from one step to the next. Um, in addition, for those of you that are just joining the channel, I'm doing a dang, already feeling exhausted. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I'm doing a series right now on Python. So just walking through the basics of Python at first, and I'm going to build up to a larger project where, potentially for a small business, they can take the API for QuickBooks and the API for like a Square account and the API for Google Analytics and pull all that data into a local SQL server to be cost effective and to be able to automate all that process and then also to create some reporting. So that's what the end goal of that Python series will be. If you'd like to kind of read through what each of those will be, I do have a post on the community tab that you could go and see what those upcoming videos are going to be about. I did this last one this past week on visualizations, and uh, I think I released it day before last. At the very end of it, I did also include just a cool little snippet. I thought it was cool how you could use Python to create your own custom QR codes. It wasn't exactly a visualization like a chart or a graph, but it was something visual that you could do with Python, and I thought it was just something fun and neat to add to the end of the video. So hopefully you enjoy that. You could create a QR, personalized QR code with, say a headshot of your image in the center of it for like uh, your LinkedIn page or something, right? So something cool that you could do with Python. In addition, also talked about Matplotlib and showed an example of how to create a regression graph with scatterplot. So check that out if that's something you're interested in. Um, Again, after SQL, Python is probably the next big important thing that I would go after as far as learning if you're interested in a data engineer role. Um, Following that, I would pick one of the cloud platforms and start getting into it, start playing with it, seeing how it works, seeing what you could do with it. Cloud platforms, so many companies, I'd say 90% of companies will be on cloud or at least have a foot in a cloud platform by the end of next year. Um, for those that aren't, they probably never will. They're probably small businesses that may never move into the cloud. Um, some just won't need it, right? Some won't ever migrate into the cloud, but I'd say 99% of them will at some point. Uh, so I would definitely go after one of the cloud platforms. Pick one that you want to specialize in, whether it's AWS. I would, if personally, I would pick AWS or Azure. Uh, that's what's on most job racks right now. 75% is Azure, about 25% AWS. Which cloud would you recommend? Don't tell me it's AWS. Um, so I 75% are Azure. I honestly. So I would pick Azure. Azure is a little bit easier than AWS in my opinion. Um, and it gives businesses and corporations that a lot of them probably have a SQL server for their analytics warehouse anyways, an opportunity to take their SSIS packages and things like that and migrate them into ADF pipelines um, without too much overhead. It's not simple, but is it's not super complex. There's definitely some transferable skills there between creating SSIS packages or DTXX packages and moving into ADF. Not that there isn't with AWS Glue, but if you're used to Microsoft technology, then I would go with Azure if that's what you're comfortable with. There are definitely plenty of positions out there that require and want you to have some type of Azure skills. So I'd get in there. I'd go out, start a account, an Azure account. You get a $300 credit to use for 90 days, and go out and play with it. My recommendation there is though, make sure that if you spin up a SQL server, that you pause it at the end of each session that you're in. Don't leave it on, or it will start incurring charges, and it'll suck up that $300 pretty quickly if you just leave on your SQL server. So be sure you do that. Uh, is industry moving towards? Uh, on-prem DBs now because they can't afford. I read an article. It's expensive, especially for if you're not a larger mid-sized corporation, uh, then yeah, I would say that on-prem for them is the way to go. And the reality is, you could do a lot of it with on-prem. If you're a small or medium-sized business, uh, you could do on-prem. That pendulum tends to swing back and forth. I've seen it even between when I was at AT&T, we swung back and forth between AWS to Azure, back to AWS, just depending on sometimes the cost, but uh, also the pendulum swings back and forth between cloud and on-prem, and sometimes you end up somewhere in the middle. Sometimes you kind of have a hybrid solution where you have several databases serving as your kind of your data warehouses on-prem, as well as having some foot in the cloud. Um, so it's yeah, it's cost is a big piece of that. Yeah, that's a good point. I have seen that recently where maybe they that for a couple of corporations that hadn't fully migrated into the cloud, they just kind of held still. Not that they completely went back to being on-prem, but they didn't go any further in completing their migration into cloud just because it was more cost effective for them to hold still for the time being. The reality is that, especially if you're looking at like a Snowflake or a Databricks, it could be really expensive really quick depending on the resources, how resource intensive your processes are. Um, I'll get to the more about the hybrid cloud here in a second. I'll come back to that, but I want to address this real quick. I don't think that you need to show your certifications in interviews. I mean, if you have it, then awesome. The Azure Data Engineer cert is if you there's a lot of resources out there. There's some great Udemy courses out there that you could go and study for it and then go and take the exam. It's not a super expensive exam, but it is honestly, if you could walk in and intelligently talk about the things that you've done in Azure, you're good. You if you can intelligently have that conversation and show that you have that knowledge, then I don't think you need your certain interviews. It's not something I've ever asked for when I was a director. When I did interviews for senior data engineers. So it's yeah, I don't think it's not a must have. Um, so hybrid cloud. So there are a lot of situations out there where companies are still have their foot in on-prem and a foot in a cloud platform. In some cases, what they're doing is they are still on-prem um, for some of their analytics, but they've moved their machine learning into the cloud just because it's quicker, it's more effective, um, and they could go into the cloud, use some of the machine learning technology, and still just pull that information from their on-prem uh, databases. Generally, is when that's the case, generally their on-prem database is going to be SQL Server. Sometimes it might be Oracle. Um, I've not seen a whole lot of Oracle as analytics as data warehouses, but I know that they're out there. Um, Generally, they've been tied to something like OBIEE, which is Oracle's business intelligence platform. Um, in the past, it was Oracle's business platform before OBIEE was Discoverer. So, for any of you that may have been in the business for a while, you may remember that. But yeah. Anyways, there's definitely plenty of businesses out there that kind of halted their migration because they realized that cost was going up pretty quickly, which is why it's so incredibly important to learn SQL to a point where you can make things that write queries that are efficient, um, and learn Python, right? Especially for uh, things like if you're building, you know, data engineering models, if you're building models for machine learning, specifically for your data scientists, making those SQL queries, writing those SQL queries and writing those Python scripts to the point where they're efficient and effective is a big deal right now because what happens is you get people out there that don't have enough kind of history, don't have enough background to know, hey, there's a more efficient way to do things, and it costs a ton because things spin and spin and spin, and the big thing with cloud that you're paying for is that processing power. Storage is super cheap with cloud, so that was kind of the draw for a lot of organizations is you're paying a penny per 100 gig, uh, or less depending on your contract, right? Um, so storage itself is cheap, super cheap, um, but you're paying for that processing, whether that be because you're running data pipelines, or you're in Databricks and you're running notebooks, or you're in Synapse and you're running notebooks and data pipelines. Um, it can get expensive quick for that processing piece. So, for instance, when I was at Cirrus, um, we had still had a lot of processes that were on-prem and still had a lot of stuff that was in SSIS packages. And then we uh, also had stuff that was in Azure, in pipelines, in Synapse. And so it's a lot of companies are still hybrid, usually because they hadn't finished their migration and they ran into kind of a cost wall. Hopefully that may have been a little bit more long-winded, sorry, uh, than you may have wanted, but, it works well for companies. I've seen plenty of companies that They have some of their data models still on prem, and some of their data models are in the cloud. Again, generally, the ones that they start moving to the cloud are the ones that they're using for their machine learning models, predictive analytics, things like that. Those are usually the first ones to move because it's easier to do in the many more machine learning resources in the cloud than there are on prem. More effective and quick ones. Why aren't all companies outsourcing all their data jobs overseas? Um, that's a good question. I'll tell you that there are there's a huge resource of data professionals, especially in India. I've worked with over the years. I've worked with a ton of brilliant uh, Indian data professionals, and it, they they're awesome. So some of them you see do that. I mean, some companies you see outsource some of their data work, especially the contracting piece, overseas. Some of them because of regulations, depending on if they work with the government, uh, it makes things more challenging, not impossible to do to work with people overseas, just in general. But some companies just don't. It's more difficult just because of regulations if they're working with some private sector um, organizations. So it that could be a piece of it. And the reality is that some companies want somebody that they could easily reach out and touch, right? I mean, they want there's a move to move back into the office. We've seen that over the past couple weeks with the Amazon announcements. Um, Amazon's going to move their people back into the office to be in the office 5 days a week starting in 2025. So, same thing's happening with AT&T, honestly. Uh, I still have plenty of friends that work for AT&T, and T, and they're, pushing people to come into the office to be in hub locations, and the corporations want sometimes somebody that they could they put it back on collaboration, right? That there's some type of benefit to being in the office together with collaboration, and you know being able to work quicker and more efficiently. And the reality is that the studies show that it really does go either way. It really depends on the person's personality, how well they work independently at home. Um, but yeah, I think that's part of the outsourcing too. I mean, that's one of those things that, with business, so many things, the pendulum swings back and forth. Um, Contracting, outsourcing, as we've seen the last, 4 or 5 years, work from home, work pushed to go back to the office. It all those pendulums, and levers kind of swing back and forth. Pendulum is the analogy that you hear a lot, but those pendulums swing back and forth, and sometimes there's more outsourcing, and sometimes there's less. Sometimes there's more contractors, and sometimes there's less. Um, it just depends on uh, the current business environment, current business atmosphere that's going on. I'll say that as you approach election years, uh, that pendulum usually swings back towards the contractor piece and outsourcing piece, because there's so much uncertainty in how regulations are going to change after that presidency, after the election occurs. At least in the US. I don't know. I'm not confident what it's like overseas, if that's the same when kind of the power changes from one hand to another. But here in the US, that has a tendency to hold true. Great questions tonight. Thanks, guys. Uh, and there's a couple of new people on tonight, so thanks for jumping on. I appreciate it. Hopefully, you're getting something out of the content that I've been putting out. I hope you enjoy it. So, yeah, so talked a little bit about cloud platforms, talked a little bit about, Python, the importance of Python and SQL. Um, and I just another point I want to make about cloud platforms and when you're picking one, it, I would, I love Azure. It's a great resource, but if there is a specific company or a specific industry that that you want to get into, go out and research job recs for that company or for that industry and see primarily what it is that they use. Because you might find that for one industry, they have a tendency to lean further towards AWS, or for another industry, they may lean more towards Azure. Again, I'll say that Azure is on about 75% of overall of job recs, um, but that percentage does change when you break it down by industry. Okay, so the next piece after cloud platforms is understand ETL or ELT tools, right? Sometimes a company will have a ETL tool or an orchestration tool that they use on top of having a cloud platform that they're using for maybe their data warehouse. For instance, you often see, one of the patterns you often see is you have Databricks on top of having a Azure cloud platform. Um, and then you have, the Azure Databricks on top of that. And then you're using Delta for your data lake and your lake house, right? And so you have ADLS buckets with data in it. Yeah, no problem. Um, and then you have the Delta Lake with your tables, and then that's kind of the medallion architecture, right? You have your raw data in ADLS, and then you have your which is the Azure Data Lake, um, which is just like blob containers, right? And then you have your Delta Lake with your tables in it, and you'll move up through that. But so sometimes they have that. Sometimes when I worked at AT&T, we had we had AWS at one point. When I was in cybersecurity, we had AWS, and we were actually writing Python scripts, putting them into Docker containers, putting them into an Elastic services, and then pushing that data into Snowflake. So we had on-prem data that we were pulling from various OLTP services, databases, and then pushing them up into Snowflake via Python packages. So that's a pattern that you may see from time to time. Um, Once you get through that, again, find a ETL service that you like, um, and and start learning a ETL service. Yeah, there's definitely some need for informatica, people that have some informatica background. Um, it's not a huge need. There's not a ton of companies that still have informatica, but it's out there. If that's something that you're interested in and want to specialize in, AWS again, with Glue is a big thing, but not as big as like moving towards like a DBT with an Airflow, right? So, one of the big things that you're starting to see more and more are patterns where companies are using DBT and then Airflow to do their transformations, do their ETL, and then orchestrate it with Airflow. So, it those are definitely skills that you want to look at. Again, be sure that you're researching the companies that you want to work in, uh, and then focus on those tools and skills that you see in those job recs. So let's talk really quickly about soft skills. Soft skills is something that is super important in data engineering, um, and in all the data professions, right? Soft skills are, such as communication and problem solving skills. If you can effectively um, problem solve, then that's a big piece of data engineering. That's a soft skill. That's not a technical skill. You may use Python or SQL or an ETL tool to solve the problem, but actually identifying the problem, identifying why the problem's occurring, troubleshooting, asking the right questions are all things that are important as a data engineer, as a data professional. Um, so problem solving skills super important, and then being able to communicate what occurred, how you fixed it, uh, in an easy to understand manner back to like a PM or back to sometimes your boss that won't have any idea what it is that you do, just understands that it needs to be done. I've had, been in plenty of situations um, where I've had bosses over the 25 years that I've been working that, you know, I was the data guy and my boss didn't have any idea about how to write a Python script or even a SQL script at, in some cases. I've been lucky the last half of my career with bosses that were brilliant and were amazing mentors. Um, which that's something to strive for as you move through your career, is finding a boss that is an amazing mentor and is willing to take the time to be encouraging and be nurturing of your skills and of your career path. Um, but so communication, problem solving, business acumen is another important piece. So business acumen is, the understanding of what the business is and what it needs from your data and how you're going to deliver it, both physically deliver it, into tables and into models, but also being able to communicate that delivery to your stakeholders is really important. If you can take something that's really complicated, boil it down to something that is simple and easy for other people to understand, that will go a long way in your career in being able to find a job, especially when you're doing interviews. It being able to communicate highly technical things in a very easy to understand manner to a non-technical audience is one of the skills that will go far in a data profession. So that's something definitely to practice. It's not always a natural skill for a data engineer or for a data professional. Definitely something to practice and continue to talk to your friends, talk to your family that aren't uh, programmers, that aren't software engineers, that aren't data engineers, and explain what you do to them. The more you do that, the easier it's going to be when you're in a professional setting to be able to communicate what it is that you're doing and how it's going to help them. Uh, if anybody has any questions, be sure to drop them in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions as we're kind of talking through what things that you need to have as a data engineer, as a data professional, from soft skills to the more technical skills, and then I'm gonna also talk about what you could do to further the progression of your career as a data professional once you do get in the door. So uh, be sure to drop any questions in the chat. I've had some great conversation already tonight, so I appreciate everybody that's been around. Um, so the next soft skill that I want to talk about real quick is collaboration. Being able to collaborate and work well in a team. Um, haha, an ETL tester role. That's a good question. Uh, I'll touch on this here in a second. Um, so being able to communicate well and collaborate well and work well in a team is super important, um, especially as you'll be working a lot of times with a project manager. You'll be working a lot of times with potentially if you're doing any data engineering into an application, you may be working with QA to the point of ETL tester role. You may be working with software development, infrastructure, DBAs, network admins, in order to manage and uh, effectively have everything that you need to perform the tasks that you need to perform. So, being able to communicate effectively across all of those different skill sets uh, is a big thing. It's a huge thing that will make or break your ability to sometimes get a job and beat out the competition. Because if you have it, it'll take you steps beyond a lot of the people that will be applying for those data engineering roles. Um, so, skills necessary to get into an ETL tester role. So, number one is going to be familiar with whatever that ETL process is that they use. Um, if that's the role that you're searching for, as with some of the other things I talked about earlier, I would go out and look for those types of roles in the industry or in the businesses that you want to work for, companies that you want to work for. Identify what ETL tool that they use and start to familiarize with yourself with that, whether it be going out and getting a free demo. A lot of them will provide a free demo for, a lot of times even up to 90 days that you could go out and play with it. Might be going to YouTube and finding videos so that you could learn, or dropping into Udemy or Coursera to find some videos to watch and familiarize yourself with how those tools work. In addition, I would also familiarize with yourself with how general ETL flows work, right? Um, what patterns you often see out there. And you could often Google ETL patterns or ELT patterns, and you'll see a bunch of them show up. Um, there's a ton of them different. There are a ton of different ones out there. Each company does it a little bit differently, in my experience. Um, so understanding what generally that how that looks, what the expectation is up front versus what the expectation is at the end of that process, and what the pitfalls are along the way. You know, start Googling, how to ETL pipelines break and seeing how they break. And so that you can learn how to troubleshoot those things and let people know, hey, I identified this because I've seen it here. Here's some, and then, an amazing skill would be able to not only identify that there was a problem, but to be able to point that group to here's how to fix it, right? So that would be my recommendation. Um, as far as specific skills necessary, problem solving skills are a big one. Attention to detail um, are huge skills when it comes to ETL testing. So I would focus on those. Technical acumen is important. Um, Not as important as those other 2 softer skills, but the technical acumen about, uh, what different error messages mean, how to look for issues, uh, are important there as well. So, great question, thanks. Um, awesome. Thank you all for joining tonight. Again, for those of you that are just joining, be sure to drop your questions in the chat. Happy to answer any questions. Just finishing up talking through some soft skills that are needed in the data professions and getting ready to move into going to talk real quickly about different tools that are necessary in data engineering as we move through 24 and into 2025. um, and yeah, I talked really briefly about the DBT and airflow pattern, how companies, you're starting to see more and more companies move into that pattern and seeing those tools more and more on uh, job recs. So be sure that, if you're just getting into it, that could be the direction that you start learning in, as opposed to, because DBT you could go out and download for free. Airflow is open source. um, you can go out and start playing with those tools, learn how to hit APIs, being familiarizing yourself with what JSON payloads look like, and how to how to flatten those and how to parse those out so that you could put those into a table structure and use that for analytics. How to orchestrate all of that with Airflow uh, are going to be important things as we move through into 2025. Uh, Version control with Git for data projects. We're starting to see that more and more. Back in the day, we didn't use Git a whole lot in SQL for SQL and data projects because so much of it was within the platforms that we were in, whether that be Oracle or SQL Server, or Postgres. Um, Doing it in, there was a time that doing it in VS Studio years ago, and using Git was difficult at best. SSIS packages just don't translate well in Git, and using version control that way. Plus, for SSIS packages, you have version control, a form of version control within the SSIS platform, within SQL Server. So didn't really need it. But you're starting to see that more and more, using Git for data projects because Azure connects to Git. Um, Informatica Intelligent Cloud Services will sync up with Git. AWS will sync up with Git. And so using Git for those things, um, are becoming more and more popular, especially for Azure, for Azure patterns. So ADO will connect to Git, as well. So you start seeing that more and more, um, for data uh, projects. The last piece here that I want to talk about really quickly is the popular data transformation tools and libraries. Um, it, there's a couple of data you're talking about learning Python and doing things like data cleansing, being familiar and understanding both PySpark and Pandas are super important. Another one that's newer, um, been around for a few years now, but Polars. If you haven't checked out Polars, go out and check out Polars. I'll be doing a, tutorial on Polars and Pandas here in a couple weeks. But Polars is really cool. It leverages the Spark patterns. It leverages Spark with the parallelism, and it's really quick, does a really great job of handling large data sets. And if you like pandas, if you've used pandas before, you like pandas, go out and check out Polars. It's really cool. You'll love it. Um, but pandas, Polars, PySpark, super important to learn as a data engineer, especially if you're looking at big data engineering, right? If you're looking at Hive and Databricks and things like that, Hadoop, uh, you're going to want to understand a lot about PySpark and Polars. So those are important ones to know. As far as let's roll into career growth. What does career growth look like for a data professional as you're moving through the ranks, right? Going from walking into the door and being a junior data engineer or a BI analyst or even an ETL tester, getting your foot in the door is a huge step, right? Especially right now in the atmosphere, in the kind of where we're at in tech right now, with some of the larger companies just going through several layoffs. um, Getting your foot in the door is a big deal. Uh, and if you that's the one of the biggest barriers to the profession right now is getting your foot in the door. There's so many roles out there for senior positions and a handful of staff positions and those level. There's just not a ton of junior level positions out there. So be sure that you're not narrowing your scope too much. Be sure that you're widening your scope to whether it be architects, ETL tester was a good one, BI analysts, uh, analytics engineer is a newer one that you see that really has actually been around for a while. We just didn't call them analytics engineers. We just used it. We were just analytics engineers. We did the analytics and the engineering. Um, but so once you get your foot in the door, that's the first step. Moving through and moving from a junior that's coming in and absorbing everything, kind of drinking from the fire hose, right? There's so much to learn. Um, Part of it is learning that this career is a lifetime learning cycle. You will always be learning. And that's part of the fun and exciting part of of this career, of this profession, is that there's always new things coming out. There are always new tools and resources and platforms, and some of them are really amazing. Uh, a- and now we have AI to help us. AI is not perfect, but AI is out there to um, help us learn and grow. But I don't depend on it too much. It's not always right. So it's not always a great learning tool until you at least have some foundation uh, before you get in. But career growth, we talked a little bit about certifications earlier. Certifications are not a must, but if you're young, if you're just getting into the profession and you um, want to show that you have the skills that you can do those things, and maybe you don't have the ability to get the professional experience, but you want to show that you have those skills, then getting a certification might be the path that you go. Don't get crazy with getting a bunch of certifications. When hiring managers see too many certifications uh, on a resume, then they start to wonder, how proficient you really are with a certain thing because you seem so spread out into all these different areas. So while having a certain breadth of knowledge is important, at being knowledgeable about several things. Having too much breath looks like you don't have any proficiency in any of the things. So be careful about that. I would warn about getting too many certifications. Um, Building a portfolio of projects and showing your hunger for learning and showing that you can quickly learn and grow um, is a big step of moving from a junior to a professional position. Continuing to uh, learn and grow and not having that ego that says, well, I know it, I don't need your help. Admitting that you need help is something that we all do. We all need help sometimes. Even the most senior of us have days where we're like, "Crap, I forgot what that syntax is." So, it, days like that, probably at least a couple times a month, where we're like, "Crap, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I don't even know why they still pay me to be here." So, we all have those moments. Um, but yeah, admitting that you're wrong, taking ownership of problems, taking leadership, not just presenting problems, but also identifying potential solutions or paths to solutions are ways that you start moving up from that junior level into a professional level and beyond into senior levels, showing that leadership ability of being able to identify a problem, suggest a solution, and not just the difference between kind of a professional as you're moving into a senior and into potentially like maybe a associate director role, is being able to influence others with your not just your knowledge and your skills, but your communication style and kind of how you get people to see the that the pros outweigh the cons of your ideas and your solutions and the paths that you want to take. Um, you know, something that you could do, especially in a organization that may not be real data mature yet, um, will be to create standards, not just to um, not just to identify, hey, this is the way that I'm going to do things, but to create standards and encourage people to kind of to your side of, hey, these are my ideas so that we could all be consistent and build things in a consistent manner. What do you think? And again, we go back to that collaboration piece and that communication piece that are so important as you continue to move through the profession. Um, Again, if there's anybody on that wants to ask any questions, be sure that you put them in the chat. Happy to answer any questions this evening. Thank you all for being here and for joining. Um, so that's a big big piece of career growth. And I'll say that um, I am a big introvert. I don't know if that's hard to believe or not, but but I am. I am an introvert. I don't always feel real comfortable in crowds. Uh, Something that I've done over the years to kind of uh, stay out of my shell is I love to sing karaoke. Uh, and so that helps me to talk in front of other people, talk in front of large audiences, talk to this camera right now to you all, um, but helps me to communicate. Otherwise, I get paralyzed, I get scared, and a little stage fright, right? So it. But anyways, point is that a lot of tech pros, are very introvert. We don't have a tendency to get out and talk to a lot of people, especially people of maybe a little bit older like myself. But I think even the younger generations, it's still a lot of those tech roles. People that have those tech skills have a tendency to be a little bit of an introvert. So one of the pieces of learning to move up in your career is being able to come out of your shell, being able to communicate, getting in front of other leaders, and being able to build those connections with those other leaders and show people that not only can do you have the technical proficiency to be able to do this job, but you have the communication style, the leadership style, the ability and willingness to mentor other junior people around you, the ability to influence others are all super important as you move through the your career succession as you move up through the ranks. Um, so if one of your goals is to be a director of data and analytics or data engineering or whatever the case may be, then being able to influence others is a huge thing. Um, Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, ETL developers and or testers, getting your foot in the door. That's a great path. Yeah, ETL testers are of huge importance. Uh, we all have a tendency to get too close to the problem and not see the forest for the trees, right? Um, and so testers and QA groups, even if you can't maybe get a ETL tester, sometimes you could get a QA role, and sometimes it'll be listed as a QA role, but it will be a more you're testing the pipelines and you're testing the ETL piece. So uh, be sure to kind of look. Don't narrow your scope too much. Make sure that maybe you're looking at QA roles as well. Um, but yeah, anything you could do to get your foot in the door. Honestly, even if there's a company out there that the position is data adjacent, and what you want to get into is data with that particular company, I would apply for that role. You could always get your foot in the door and then show them that you have those other skills. And then sometimes getting your foot in the door is the biggest piece. Um, it If you get your foot in the door, or one of the best ways to get your foot in the door too is to network. Go out to meetups, go out to out to LinkedIn and find people that are at a company that you want to get into and start to comment on their posts so that they start seeing your name pop up all the time. And then they'll realize, and have intelligent conversations with them through that posting platform. Reach out to them on LinkedIn. um, whether you're following them, send them a message, drop them a note saying, "Hey, I really enjoy your content that you put out there. Um, I just wanted to connect with you," and then you start to build that relationship, and that will help you get your foot in the door potentially with that company. Those are great ways uh, to get your foot in the door at companies, because sometimes things aren't posted, or sometimes they'll see your name so often about a certain topic and be like, "Oh, hey, that guy on LinkedIn that I see all the time, he is seems to be great at this." uh, and then they'll reach out to you, and uh, let you know that there's a position open, especially if you let them know, hey, I'm interested in at some point in working for the company that you're in. Uh, but yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to people and ask them what their experiences are at a company. And keep in mind, I know that right now it's a more of an employer's market than an employee's market, but don't forget when you're doing interviews that you're interviewing that company as much as they're interviewing you. Make sure that it's a culture fit for you as well. As far as that the company feels like this fits in with my um, values and purpose. Because if it doesn't, it won't last long. But also, sometimes you need to get in to get some experience so that you can move somewhere else. So I get it if that's the case. Yeah, awesome. I hope that I hope this video has helped you. Appreciate it. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. Happy to answer any questions. I've kind of covered the topics that I wanted to cover. So I'm definitely open to any conversation about your career paths, about data engineering. If you have questions about kind of what I've done in the past or how I've approached certain things in the past, let me know. Um, and I'll probably, I think I'm going to start talking through kind of some interview questions that I have both performed as well as heard in the past. So, as a director of data engineering, I've had my fair share of questions that I ask people in data roles, as well have as over the 25 years I've been in the profession, have answered a ton of questions uh, in an interview setting as I've moved through different job roles and different companies. So, in addition to working with small businesses, I mean, working with a small business and convincing them to let you help them with their data needs is an interview as well. And having those skills is important. So let's talk really quick. I think that's a great topic. Let's talk about interview skills. Yeah, we've had a couple questions about what to show during interviews as far as technical skills, as far as certifications. Um, but the soft skills are what's going to generally help you to stand out in an interview. If you can't meet the bare minimum of the technical skills, then probably nothing else will help you. But if you're meeting the bare minimum of the technical skills, the difference between somebody that meets the bare minimum of the technical skills and somebody that's at the top of that range of technical skills, you can outweigh all of that with your soft skills. Uh, and so, I mean, your ability to communicate, your ability to, again, we talked a little bit about influence others. Influencing others is super important in a interview because you're trying to influence them to hire you. But your ability to communicate is of utmost importance in a interview setting. Um, as far and as long as your ability to communicate comes out and your if you could demonstrate some type of leadership skills, so talk about when you're so there's something called a star pattern when you're in an interview setting and you are being asked, especially a lot of them will be tell me about a time when type questions, and it'll be something along the lines of tell me about a time when you were in a project and you were able to demonstrate leadership skills. And so you'll have to talk about some way that you walked into that project, into like a scrum meeting or whatever the case may be, and you were able to influence others with your ability to communicate and your leadership skills. And so being able to push through that project, even though you're not the PM, even though you're uh, a junior data engineer, then there's still going to be situations where you can demonstrate those skills. Um, so again, soft skills super important in a interview setting. Definitely I would take, when I was when I was a director, I would take somebody that had that drive and that passion for learning over somebody that felt like they knew everything, that demonstrated that they knew a ton every day of the week. Because it is so much easier to deal with somebody that doesn't have um, that ego and doesn't have that kind of superiority complex sometimes than somebody that does. And it's easier to help to encourage those people. Being able to, as a leader, being able to help somebody move from a junior level into a senior level, and even from a senior level into a leadership position is super exciting. To see people grow and learn is amazing. So so yeah, be sure that you're doing those things. But yeah, I'm gonna step away for really quick for a second, and I will be right back. Sorry about that. The danger of live streams and drinking too much water during the day. So if you have any questions, be sure you pop them in the chat. Chat was just talking about uh, interview questions and how I have performed interviews in the past as a director, as well as how I have answered some questions as as a interviewee uh, through my 25 years. So if you have any specific questions about how to answer questions in an interview, be sure to pop them in the chat, or any type of data engineer questions at all. Pop them in the chat. Happy to answer them. Uh, just double checking, making sure that I wasn't still on mute. Um, so, uh, one of the questions that you'll get asked, right, and it's inevitable. Uh, what are the necessary tools and knowledge required? Airflow, Snowflake. Great question. And this kind of leads into the question that I was going to talk about. So that's perfect. Um, so the knowledge required as far as Airflow, Snowflake, Databricks, Kafka, Spark, DBT, etc. It really depends on the role that you're applying for. It Each company is different when it comes to that. There's so many tools out there, so many skills out there. Like, we talked about earlier, SQL and Python are pretty across the board, right? As far as needing to have some level of proficiency with those two uh, as you move into a data position. But the rest of these, some companies have Snowflake, some don't. Some companies use Databricks, some don't. Uh, Kafka is getting more and more popular, especially as the need for streaming data sets become more important. So that's a good one to add to kind of the SQL Python piece. Kafka is a platform that people use a lot for that streaming piece. Spark's super important, especially as data sets continue to get larger and larger. So not just PySpark, but actually understanding Spark as a whole is super important. as we, because data's not getting any smaller, right? Data's getting bigger and bigger. So Spark, super important. DBT, again, talked about a little bit about DBT earlier. I would say that DBT is a good one to learn right now because it is cost effective. So if you're wanting to get into like a medium sized business, um, or a small business and really start to make an impact, being able to come in with that DBT knowledge and combined with Airflow, a lot of times DBT and Airflow are used hand in hand in order to do the transformations and then to orchestrate everything that's going on, um, are important skills to have. Aside from that, learn a data, cloud platform. Go out, learn a cloud platform, and that'll go a long way. Whether that be Azure, I would pick Azure, AWS, depending on the industry and the specific company that you want to target for your career. Some people have specific companies that they want to target in your career. So if you do go out and research that company, identify which of the cloud platforms that they're currently using, go out and learn it. Go out and learn it in and out, not just the pipeline piece, but also things like secrets and key vaults and how that platform handles that, how to spin up new resources. If they're on AWS, uh, what be sure that you understand what a RDS database is. Um, if you could identify from the job recs that you could find what database that they are using for their data warehouse, whether it's Snowflake or whether they're using Delta and Databricks, or they're using RDS Postgres database, or whether they're using a Synapse SQL uh, database, then you know just depends. That's a kind of a loaded question, um, but that goes into the question that I was going to talk about as far as interview topics. um you know Even if you don't have those skills, don't that let that don't that be a deterrent to you applying for the position. If you fit 50-60% of the job rec, apply for the position if it's something that you're interested in, because you may not have any professional knowledge of that specific tool, but you may have something, knowledge and experience in something kind of adjacent to it. For instance, you might be strong in AWS Glue, but you haven't had a whole lot of experience with Synapse or ADF in Azure. Then those skills are transferable. So you can easily migrate to an AWS Glue from having used another pipeline or another ETL tool. Um, you can move from having used SQL Server your whole life into using Snowflake pretty easily. Uh, I did. I moved when I moved from the telecommunication side to the um, cybersecurity side in AT&T. I went from using SQL Server to using Snowflake, and that jump's not huge. Um, there's definitely I loved Snowflake. It was really cool, and would love to be in a position again where I'm getting to use Snowflake. But it it's really powerful, has really cool uh, abilities with being able to parse XML and JSON that at the time SQL Server just didn't do as well. Um, but hopefully that kind of answers your question. Uh, Again, apologize for being a little long winded, maybe. So great question, though. Thank you. And thank you for jumping on. For those of you that are on, that haven't joined the Gamble Data Sphere yet, be sure that you check that out. I have a website, gambledataengineering.com. I am working on building a community of data professionals that are encouraging and can help each other to learn and grow as you move through your data journey. So I call it the Gamble Data Sphere. We have a Discord channel, building that along with on that Gamble Data Sphere. you can access our monthly code challenges. The first one was in September, uh, kind of a not too in depth one because I just launched it in the middle of the month, but October's will be a bit more in depth, a little bit more complicated, and you'll have the whole month of October to do it. For those of you that are doing the coding challenge, be sure that you get your submissions in by September 30th in order to be uh, considered for the spotlight on our code review for that code challenge. So doing that as well. Uh, but I think I'm going to wrap it up here. It's been just over an hour. If anybody has any final questions, I'm happy to entertain those and answer any final questions. But aside from that, be sure that you look for the next couple of videos that we're going to put out, that I'm going to put out. The first one is I am wrapping up editing a video on when to use cast versus when to use convert in SQL Server, even what cast and convert do, what that syntax is, as well as where you could use convert, what databases and systems use convert, and what other uh, functions you may use instead. So I'm going to be releasing that video. Probably, I'll probably schedule it to release tomorrow. Going to wrap up editing that here in a little bit, and then also going to do a video on Python functions and modules and how to create your own functions and modules within Python and how to use those within your Python scripts. So be sure to look forward to that. That'll be coming out probably Monday. Probably do that one on Monday. But be sure to check out that Python series that I'm working on. But as always, if there are any topics that you'd like for me to cover in the future, be sure that you pop them in the chat. Be sure that you go into some of the comments or some of the posts on our community page. There's some places there that you could go in and suggest topics that you'd like to see covered. Um, and people have before. People have in the live chats. I do these live chats on Friday evenings, usually around 10 o'clock for about an hour or so, depending on how the conversation goes. And again, these are kind of just open office hours for me. So if you have a question about a SQL script, if you have a question about Python, if you have a question about your career and how to get into data engineering or the data professions, then I am open to those questions and I am here to help you to be able to get into those careers and be able to break into data engineering. So uh, reach out to me on any of the socials. I have those links in my main YouTube page as well as my email address. And you could always go to gambledataengineering.com/contact to contact me and reach out to me from there as well. So I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Uh, if you have any final questions, probably going to hang out here for a minute just to see if y'all have any final questions, but we'll close it down here in a moment. So again, thank you all for joining. Have really enjoyed our conversations tonight. As I always do, be sure that you check out the Gamble Data Sphere and jump into our Discord and ask questions there as well. Thank you, and you all have a good night.